Evio.
Welcome back to The Devil Within. This is part 2 of the Mantis Man of the Musconetcong. Chapter 4, The Insect Gods. So welcome back to part 2 of our journey into the strangest, most thinly documented, and let's be honest, most Jefferson Township adjacent cryptid I've ever accidentally overlooked. On the last episode, we went home, back to Lake Apacon, back to the narrow spillway that becomes the Musconetcong River, back to the water where my brother and his friends fished, where I swam, where summers felt endless, and where a handful of adults reported something that absolutely should not exist. A fisherman waist-deep in the current watching a tall, mantis-like creature glide through the reeds. Another man caught in fog, paralyzed by the sensation of being studied by something thin and inhuman. And finally, the driver who saw a semi-translucent, 8-foot humanoid insect step out of the river and disappear into the trees. Mantis Man, born of rumor, witnessed by a frightened few, and lurking allegedly in the water that helped shape my childhood. And now the question becomes bigger. If something this strange can take root in a small stretch of a New Jersey river, why is its shape so familiar worldwide? Because here's the part I wasn't prepared for. Mantis Man isn't just a local cryptid. The man has cousins. Now, before the internet made it possible to catalog every bizarre thought humans have ever had, ancient cultures were already telling stories about mantis spirits, tall, watchful, stick-thin entities that drifted between worlds. Across southern Africa, the San people spoke of Kagan, the mantis god. Not a monster or a demon, but a creator, clever, unpredictable, fond of mischief and transformation. He appears in rock art across the region with the same unmistakable silhouette. Long limbs, angled posture, a head that tilts as if it's listening to something that only he can hear. Move east into Asia and you'll find mantis imagery woven into spiritual art. Move west into Europe and you'll find carvings of tall, bent-limbed beings whose proportions feel more insect than human. Move forward in time and you'll find early UFO contactees describing insectoid figures not with terror, but with awe. It's like this shape has been squatting in the human imagination for thousands of years, waiting for us to catch up. But the real momentum came in the 20th century, when the modern UFO phenomenon began producing stories that sounded eerily familiar. Most people know the classics: the Greys, the Reptilians, the Nordics. But buried in case files, hypnotic regressions, and the accounts of deeply rattled abductees were descriptions of the mantis beings. 7 to 9 feet tall, impossibly slender, long hinged limbs, large dark eyes, shoulders that taper like armor, movements too smooth, too fluid, too quiet. They were usually described as supervisors during abductions. Not the ones performing experiments, those were the small Greys. The mantis figures were the observers, the overseers, cold, inquisitive, clinically curious. Everything that makes a praying mantis unsettling in your backyard becomes something else entirely when scaled up to way above average human height. In the 1980s and 1990s, abductees described these beings in startlingly consistent detail. Long arms that folded like blades, soft, clacking mandible movements, telepathic communication rather than speech, a sense of being intellectually outmatched by something ancient. And these accounts came from people scattered across continents, people who had never met, they'd never spoken, they'd never, compared notes. The same shape, the same posture, the same uncanny stillness. Sound familiar? Because it should. When I read those accounts, when I compared them with the Musconetcong sightings, I had the sudden, deeply uncomfortable realization that Mantis Man doesn't exist in a vacuum. He fits into a global pattern, a recurring archetype, a silhouette that humanity keeps drawing again and again, whether intentionally or not. Which raises, a fun little question. Why? Why this shape? Why these proportions? Why does the insectoid form haunt the edge of our stories and the corners of our memory? There are theories. Some psychologists believe these beings are projections, exaggerated forms of the very things that we've evolved to fear. Insects, they trigger something primal in us. Disease, infestation, venom, parasitism. Our wiring is ancient, and it doesn't take much to flip these switches. But there's also a competing theory, one that makes the hair on my arms stand up a little. It goes like this. What if mantis-shaped beings feel so familiar because somewhere deep in our evolutionary memory, we've seen them before? Not recently, not locally, not physically, but in the collective places where fear and imagination overlap. It's not that Mantis Man is real, it's that the idea of Mantis Man is old. Older than Jefferson, older than New Jersey, maybe older than the concept of monsters itself. And that's what makes this next part even stranger. The Musconetcong sightings don't just match the global descriptions, they match them precisely, right down to the posture. The height, the gliding walk, the angled limbs, the sense of presence. It's as if this little river in New Jersey accidentally tapped into a worldwide mythic archetype. One that predates towns, that predates language, that predates any of us. And if you've ever stood alone on a riverbank at dusk, if you've ever heard the reeds shift when there wasn't a breeze, if you've ever felt watched by something you couldn't see, you know why stories like this survive. Episode 5, Why Bugs Terrify Us. Okay, so we widen the scope, from a strange creature wading quietly through the Musconetcong River to the unsettling realization that mantis-shaped beings appear everywhere. Ancient rock art, African creation myths, UFO encounters, sleep paralysis visions. Our river monster might not be unique at all. He just might be local. But before we talk biology, before we talk physics, before we talk misidentification or hallucination or archetypal memory, we need to acknowledge something very simple. Humans are hardwired to be afraid of bugs. Not dislike, not discomfort, not ick, fear. There's something ancient in us, something primal, something that wakes up whenever a spider darts across the floor or a cockroach skitters behind the stove. And the larger the insect, the more limb-like its legs, the more alien its posture, the deeper that instinct reaches. So the real question becomes, why do so many people across cultures imagine insectoid beings as the ultimate other? And what does that tell us about the Mantis Man sightings? So let's start with the science. Insects are built on an entirely different blueprint than mammals. We're soft, they're hard. We're warm, they're cold. We breathe through lungs, they breathe through holes in their sides. We have skeletons that hold us together. They wear their skeletons like armor. If insects were cars, we'd be driving plush convertibles, they'd be driving bolt-tightened war machines. This is part of what makes them so visually unsettling. Their movements are governed by hydraulics and tension, not muscles and joint rotation. They snap, they twitch, they unfold like pocket knives. Our brains, which evolved to recognize predators by the way their muscles ripple or their weight shifts, we don't know what to do with that. A wolf moves like an animal. A mantis moves like a decision. Now scale that up to human height, or more. Make it 7, 8, 9 feet tall. Let it stand on 2 legs. Let it tilt its head with mathematical precision. Let it appear translucent in the right light. Your brain doesn't just revolt. It freaking panics because giant insects shouldn't exist. And here's the kicker. They can't. Not physically. Not in our, atmosphere. Insects rely on what's called passive oxygen diffusion, meaning air seeps into their bodies without effort. That works at a tiny size. It doesn't work at 6 feet tall. Their exoskeletons would collapse under their own weight. Their breathing structures couldn't supply enough oxygen to even keep them alive. Their joints wouldn't bend under gravity without fracturing and exploding. A real mantis the size of a professional basketball player would suffocate, implode, or just shatter within seconds. So when people swear they've seen one, science demands we look somewhere else. Not at biology, but at psychology. And psychology, as always, has its own opinions. We are programmed at an evolutionary level to avoid anything that looks like an insect. They're carriers of disease, they're parasites, vectors of sickness, creatures that bite, sting, lay eggs under the skin, they burrow, they feed. This aversion is so deep that infants who've never been injured or scarred by insects still show measurable fear responses when they see them. Nature seemed to have laced our DNA with nope, long before the mantis ever raised its first back leg. But fear isn't just biological, it's also symbolic. Insects are powerful metaphors for the things that we dread the most. Loss of control, swarm behavior, mindlessness, predation, camouflage, watching without being seen, being studied instead of being understood. And mantises, in particular, occupy an especially eerie niche. They sit perfectly still for hours, waiting, watching. Their heads rotate like cameras on ball bearings. Their movements are too smooth to be comforting, too precise to feel unthinking. A mantis doesn't look alive. It looks aware. That detail matters because it's the same detail that turns up in every Mantis Man sighting. Awareness. Not threat, not hunger, not aggression, just that calm, patient, unsettling intelligence. And that's what makes the Musconetcong sighting so chilling. Not the height, not the translucence, believe it or not even the strange gait. It's the feeling that witnesses reported. The creature wasn't hiding, didn't need to. It was evaluating them. Which brings us to the next uncomfortable question. If giant insects can't exist, and if people across cultures keep seeing them anyway, what exactly are they seeing? A misidentified heron? A trick of light? A backlit hunter in waders? A hallucination triggered by fog or exhaustion or stress? A fragment of the brain pulling from deep evolutionary memory during a moment of fear? Or is it something stranger? A psychological archetype, a folkloric template, a kind of cross-cultural hallucination humanity has been quietly generating for millennia. Because human beings are incredible at imagining monsters. But we're even better at imagining them in the same shapes, the same proportions, the same silhouettes, again and again, long before the internet ever existed, which raises one last possibility. Maybe people of the Musconetcong, my people, didn't see a literal 7-foot praying mantis. Maybe they saw something else. Something that the brain, in its panic, translated into the closest visual match it could find in its ancient catalog of fears. A shape, a posture, a presence. Something out there. Something watching. Something the river knows how to keep secret. So next, we're going to go back to Jefferson Township, back to the riverbank, back to the quiet places where stories cling to stone and water like moss. Because sightings are one thing, myth is another. But the feeling of standing on that bridge, the one overlooking the spillway that drains like a Pacon into the Musconetcong, and knowing that people have seen something in that exact stretch of water, that's the part that lingers. The river keeps its secrets. So this is our last chapter, the last bend in the Musconetcong, that last look into the reeds, the last question whispered over the cold surface of the river. We've gone from my hometown lake to ancient mythology, from strange eyewitness accounts to the deep circuitry of human fear. And now we come home, back to Jefferson, back to the water that raised a community. I returned to the river on that late fall afternoon, the kind of day where the light turns gold for 15 minutes and then drops straight into darkness like a trapdoor. Leaves skittered across the pavement. The air smelled like wood smoke and wet dirt. And the Musconetcong, narrow and quiet, flowed exactly as it always has. You wouldn't have known anything strange had ever happened here. Rivers are expert liars that way. The spillway where Lake Apacong narrows into the small channel, it still murmurs with the same soft soundtrack of splashing water and distant boat motors. And the bridge a little farther down, the one like the one in Hackettstown where a driver saw something tall and translucent step out of the water onto the rocks. It looks ordinary, beautiful even, which is what makes this whole thing so unnerving. Nothing about the river announces itself as haunted. Nothing warns you that people have seen something inhuman standing in the shallows. Nature rarely gives disclosures. I leaned against the railing, looking down. The water slid over stones as if smoothing them on purpose. Reeds swayed in a slow, secret language. The shadows stretched long beneath the overhang where the roots clutched the bank. I tried to imagine being the fisherman, waist deep, mind drifting, when suddenly a shape stands where no shape should be standing. I tried to imagine being the man in the fog, that strange paralysis, that hum you feel more than you hear. I tried to imagine being the driver, the one who saw the impossible thing step out of the water, tall and thin and partly transparent, like a living ripple made of bone and shadow. And I found it kind of easy. Rivers are places where your eyes will lie to you. The light bends, the water refracts, shapes distort. The natural world is already surreal. You don't need cryptids to then make it stranger. And yet, there's a difference between illusion and presence. Between, I thought I saw something, and something saw me. Every witness described that feeling. Not terror, not confusion, but being observed. That stays with me. The logical part of me knows what the explanations are. A heron in low light can look almost human. Fog plays tricks. Stress and solitude can spark hallucinations. And the human brain loves to impose structure on shadows. But the part of me that grew up here, the part that knows the sound of the lake, the part that knows how cold the river runs even in August, doesn't dismiss things so easily. Childhood does that. It primes certain places with a kind of emotional resonance that you don't feel anywhere else. I remember riding my bike past these woods. I remember the sudden chills that you can't really explain. I remember how loud the insects were in summer, a wall of sound that felt like an audience. I remember thinking the lake was alive, and not metaphorically, literally. And if you told 10-year-old me that something strange lived in the river, something tall and silent, watchful, I would have believed you without hesitation. As an adult, belief works differently. Belief has guardrails. But curiosity survives everything. There's a reason local legends cling to the landscape, generation after generation. And it's not because they're true. It's because certain places encourage imagination. Because certain shadows linger longer than they should. Because certain stretches of water feel older than the towns around them. The Musconetcong is one of those places. Not because a mantis creature really walks its length, though a few men would still swear that it does, but because the river, in its stillness and in its secrecy, welcomes the idea of things that we can't always explain. The fisherman didn't create the story. The driver didn't create the story. The cryptid blogs and UFO theorists didn't create the story. The river created the story. The witnesses just noticed it. And whether Mantis Man is real or not almost doesn't matter anymore. Because once a place has a story attached to it, the place changes. You see it differently. You feel it and experience it differently. You remember it differently. I went home thinking I was revisiting geography. Instead, I just dropped in on memory, fear, wonder, and the uncomfortable truth that even the most familiar places have corners that we've never really looked into. Maybe the Musconetcong never held a monster at all. Maybe the only thing in the water is the reflection of our oldest fears, elongated, distorted, sharpened by imagination. But then again, maybe some stories exist because something once happened, something quiet, something brief, something wordless, and the river kept it. Because rivers do that. They remember what we forget. and they keep their secrets well. Thanks for listening to the Mantis Man of the Musconetcong. Follow us on Instagram at The Devil Within Pod, at Evio Creative, and at The Ides of April Pod. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. And leave a rating and a review. It helps more people discover the show, which helps us grow. And share this episode with someone who loves dark history or true crime or something kind of adjacent to the paranormal. And please check the show notes for amazing deals from the great companies that still support long-form storytelling. QUINCE, luxury essentials at affordable prices. Go to quince.com/devilwithin for free shipping and 365-day returns. Mint Mobile, premium wireless starting at just $15 a month. Go to mintmobile.com/devilwithin. ExpressVPN, protect your data anywhere. Go to expressvpn.com/devilwithin for up to 4 months free. Mood, CBD and THC gummies legally shipped nationwide. Go to mood.com/devilwithin for up to 20% off your first order. Ollie Dog Food, give your dog the nutrition they deserve. Go to ollie.com/ides for 60% off your first box. And Monarch, the only finance app you'll ever need. Go to monarch.com/ides for 50% off your first year. Again, thanks for listening, and until next time, stay safe out there. The Devil Within is an Evio production recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm your writer and host, Brandon Morgan.